wisdom, and understanding. We then, unworthy servant here, gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interest, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity one towards another, through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. Honourable House now resume its sittings. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Miss Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Miss Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Miss Nito, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redman, Miss James Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Minister paper numbers 96 to 98 entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues dated August 27, 2018 and September 3 and 10, 2018. Annual report for the Board of Supervision on Poor Relief Administration for the years 2010-2011 to 2013-2014. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Social Development Commission for the year 2015-2016. The Emergency Powers Continuance Number 4 Resolution 2018 under the Emergency Powers Act. The Law Reforms Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zones, Extension of Period of Operation Number 5, Order 2018. And the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zones, Extension of Period of Operation Number 5, Order Resolution 2018, under the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act.
Bills brought from the Senate. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally. Questions and answers to questions. Mr. Tweed.
Mr. Speaker, at the next meeting of this House, I crave your leave to table the following motion. Be it resolved that this Honourable House debate the desirability of teaching Jamaican Standard English as a second language, given the demonstrable fact that most children are initially familiar only with Jamaican Creole as their native tongue.
Motions
Mr. Speaker.
for leave to introduce bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Doctor.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Whereas Nanny is our sole national heroine, which is a singular status of the highest order, and whereas Nanny has captivated national and international attention, and whereas Nanny is an integral part of our cultural heritage and is accorded iconic status in her Portland home, and whereas there is a great need that her status as a heroine be integrated in the daily lives of our citizens and visitors, be it resolved that this Honourable House recommend that the Port Antonio Square be renamed Nanny Square, that a statue be erected in that square in her honor, and that any necessary attendant infrastructural and other modifications to said square be undertaken and completed to reflect our high regard and respect for her status. And be it resolved that the passage between breastworks in Port Antonio and the Nanny Falls be named the Nanny Trail, with all attendant issues arising from this change undertaken and completed in a manner befitting her status as our sole national heroine. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Presentation of bills without leave of the House was obtained.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Tweed.
Mr. Speaker.
Okay, we have to retrieve to questions and answers to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the expiry of 21 days, I would wish to ask the Minister of Health the following question.
Motions for leave to. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recommit notices of motion given orally in order to permit the Prime Minister to take the resolution standing in. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following resolutions. 1, the Emergency Powers Act, the Emergency Powers Continuance number 4, Resolution 2018, and 2, the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017, the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James, Extension of Period of Operations, number 5, Order Resolution 2018. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give further notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take these motions. Whereas by virtue of Section 21 and 2B of the Constitution of Jamaica, the Governor General may make a proclamation declaring that a state of public emergency exists, is satisfied that action has been taken, or is immediately threatened by any person or body or persons of such a nature and on so extensive a scale as to be likely to endanger the public safety. And whereas the Governor General was satisfied that a state of public emergency existed as a result of the aforementioned circumstances, and whereas on the 18th day of January 2018, the Governor General by proclamation declared that a state of public emergency exists in the parish of St. James, and further declared that the said proclamation shall, unless previously revoked, remain in force for 14 days or for such longer period not exceeding 3 months as both Houses of Parliament may determine by a resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of all the members of each House. And whereas it is provided by Section 23 of the Constitution of Jamaica that a proclamation made by the Governor General for the purposes of and in accordance with that section shall, unless previously revoked, remain in force for 14 days or for such longer period not exceeding 3 days as both Houses of Parliament may determine by a resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of all members of each House. And whereas under the provision of Section 3(1) of the Emergency Powers Act, it is lawful for the Governor General during a state of public emergency by order to make regulations for securing the essentials of life to the community. And whereas the Governor General, in exercise of the powers conferred upon him by Section 3(1) of the Emergency Powers Act, made the Emergency Powers Regulation 2018 for securing the essentials of life to the parish of St. James during the state of public emergency. And whereas Section 3(4) of the Emergency Powers Act provides any regulation so made shall be laid before the Senate and the House of Representatives as soon as may be after they are made, and shall not continue in force after the expiration of 7 days from the time they are so laid before the Senate and the House of Representatives, whichever shall be later, unless a resolution is passed by the Senate and the House of Representatives providing for the continuance thereof. And whereas the Emergency Powers Regulation 2018 were laid in the House of Representatives on the 23rd day of January 2018, and in the Senate on the 26th day of January 2018. And whereas it was resolved by both houses of Parliament that the state of public emergency declared as aforesaid and the Emergency Powers Regulation 2018 remain and continue in force until the 2nd day of May 2018. And whereas it was thereafter resolved by both houses of Parliament that the state of public emergency declared as aforesaid and the Emergency Powers Regulations 2018 remain and continue in force for a period of 3 months until the 2nd day of August 2018. And whereas it was therefore resolved by both houses of Parliament that the state of public emergency declared as aforesaid and the Emergency Powers Regulation 2018 remain and continue in force for a period of 3 months until the 1st day of November 2018. And whereas it is desirable that the state of public emergency declared as aforementioned should remain in force for a further period of 3 months until the 31st day of January 2019. And B, the Emergency Powers Regulation 2018 to continue in force until the expiration of the state of public emergency. Now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Emergency Powers Continuance Number 4 Resolution 2018. The state of public emergency declared by the Governor General by proclamation on the 18th day of January 2018 shall remain in force for a period of 3 months until the 31st day of January 2019. And 3, the Emergency Powers Regulation 2018 are hereby continued in force until the 31st day of January 2019. Yeah. The law reform, the second resolution, Mr. Speaker, is the law reform. Let me just make sure. Sorry for me. Is the law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Mount Salem community and environs in the parish of St. James, zone extension, period of operation, number 5, order resolution 2018. Whereas Section 4 of the Law Reform, Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Prime Minister in Council may, by order, declare any geographically defined area within a single continuous boundary in Jamaica as a zone of special operations for a period not exceeding 60 days if there are reasonable grounds to believe that due to rampant criminality, gang warfare, escalating violence and murder, and the threat to the rule of law and public order, it is necessary so to do. And whereas, in accordance with that section, the Prime Minister in Council made the law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Mount Salem community and environs in the parish of St. James Zone, Order 2017. And whereas that order provides that the said zone shall operate for a period of 60 days. And whereas Section 5 of the Act provides that the Prime Minister in Council, after consultation with the Joint Command, may, by order, subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, extend the said period for such further periods, each not exceeding 60 days. And whereas on the 16th day of October 2018, the Prime Minister in Council made the law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Mount Salem community and environs in the parish of St. James Zone, extension of period of operations, number 5, order 2018. Now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as a law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Mount Salem community and environs in the parish of St. James Zone, extension of period of operation number 5, order resolution 2018. And 2, the law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James, extension of period of operation number 5, order 2018, is hereby affirmed.
We go to
So, Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today I will seek suspension of standing orders to enable me to take these motions and for their approval.
presentation of presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Mr. Speaker, I now move to introduce.
Dr. Clark, turn the mic off for me, please. Thank you.
I now move to introduce and have first time a bill shortly entitled the Food Storage and Prevention of Infestation Amendment Act 2018.
A bill shortly entitled the Food Storage and Prevention of Infestation Amendment Act 2018, read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Public business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is almost becoming a routine, Mr. Speaker, for me to stand here seeking the commitment of this Honourable House for the continuation of the zones of special operations and the states of public emergency. Mr. Speaker, this is a representation No, I did. Forgive me, I was not following the proper protocol. Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. Prime Minister, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, just for clarification, Prime Minister, are you taking both motions for the SOE and the SOSO in one debate, or you're taking them sequentially?
I think. Thank you for the question, member. I was about to clarify. I will have one debate, but separate votes. We would like to close it today. That wasn't. Well, let me open the debate, and then because I don't think there is anything extraordinarily controversial in it. On the matter of the time, though, I will check before I commit to it. And then the other challenges, I have some travels and those things, so which is a time issue. Mr. Speaker, I'm here again seeking the commitment of the House for the continuation of the St. James state of public emergency and the continuation of the Mount Salem zone of special operations, both of which, Mr. Speaker, are proceeding well according to the planned framework established both under the zones of special operation and under the regulations governing the state of public emergency. Mr. Speaker, from the outset I will say that each vote in this House to support the zones of special operations and the state of public emergency demonstrates to the public the commitment of the Parliament to stand united against the criminal enterprise and those who resort to violence as their first tool of conflict resolution. The government is strengthening the capacity of the security forces through a series of strategic initiatives and significant financial investments. What we as parliamentarians need to do is to continue to demonstrate our resolve. It is unacceptable for our people to live in fear or for Jamaicans to be killed at a rate of 9 or 10 times the global average. And Mr. Speaker, that's where we are now. I recently had sight of some statistics showing global homicide rates, and where Jamaica is placed is not where we want to be. We like to be in the top 5 and in the top 10 of the ease of doing business or at the rate in which we are reducing our debt, but we don't want to be in the top 5 or the top 10 for homicides. That's not where we want to be. Mr. Speaker, this high homicide rate must be seen for what it is. It is abnormal. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, I see it as an emergency situation. Unfortunately, there are those who would want to characterize it as the new normal. It is not normal to have a murder rate, a homicide rate that we have. Countries that are at war and civil strife have a far lower homicide rate than we do. So, Mr. Speaker, I see this as an emergency, a national emergency, and that the government must act with speed, alacrity, deliberateness, instrumentality, decisiveness to bring this problem under control. Mr. Speaker, certainly this government has not treated the homicide situation, the murders in Jamaica, as business as usual. We must give our security forces the legislative tools, but more importantly, and the financial tools, but more importantly, we must give them the political support for them to do their jobs. Mr. Speaker, the use of enhanced security measures is not indefinite. And at each opportunity, before members opposite raise that point, I wish to raise it as well. It is not an indefinite tool. We accept that. Bear in mind, however, Mr. Speaker, that I just wanted to point out that, yes, this tool of the state of emergency is always meant to be a very quick and decisive response to major problems, whether it is natural disasters, an upsurge in violence. But there are cases where the concept of a state of emergency has been used for significant periods of time to deal with specific issues. In countries like the United States, they declare that there are particular states of emergency, whether it is to do with threat to energy, terrorism, and they put in place, in France, for example, they declared a state of emergency, and they put in place the measures to deal with that situation until the legislative framework catches up to these unique kind of conditions. So it is not unusual for states of emergency to last beyond a year. But we agree, there is no debate, there is no division on this side. And indeed, we on this side would not want to perpetuate a state of emergency built into the minds of Jamaicans that this is an indefinite tool. Certainly that is not our position. And I just want to make that point to lucidly clear. Mr. Speaker, at this point, however, for strategic reasons, we should not be asking how long. Because how long and a response is given would give away something that we find to be very useful, and that is the strategic intent of the government. So, members opposite have said, this crime strategy won't work. This won't get you the massive reductions you need in crime. And they say that for all kinds of reasons, but one of the reasons they prefer is that the criminals are just waiting you out. That's one of the reasons they put forward. The criminals are just waiting you out. But that is exactly the reason why you don't tell them a time. That is exactly the reason you don't give away your strategic intent. So we are not, there are things, we on this side are not debating that. We know that yes, there are some criminals who in their decision-making cycle will say, all right, these measures have created a more difficult environment to commit crime, so we wait. But we don't want them to be able to set a finite date on their waiting. And so, Mr. Speaker, the Parliament of Jamaica needs to be very smart in its articulation, not to in any way limit your questioning of government policy, but at the same time, it is in the national interest to disrupt the decision-making cycle of criminals and not to in any way give them any advantage. And I'm just making the point again for clarity, so that I know it will be raised, and I can tell you I've given you my response already. So then you don't need to speak after. Good. So, Mr. Speaker, one thing we can agree on is that both the zones of special operation and the SOE have increased public confidence in the security forces. The focused approach has increased the capacity of the security forces, because it is not that we have just deployed forces into the field without giving them requisite support. But the other more important thing that it has done, it has brought this Parliament on a very frequent timetable to discuss the issue of crime. And at the end of all the debates, even vigorous and robust debates, we have come up with a consensus on how to proceed. So it's a very difficult task building national consensus, but I believe, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, that the most valuable benefit of the debate is that we come up with a consensus against the criminals. And this House consistently has shown that consensus. And I think, if nothing else, that is the most valuable thing that has emerged from this crime strategy. Mr. Speaker, acting on the advice of the National Security Council in accordance with the Zozo Act and in accordance with Section 5 of that Act specifically, which guides that the Prime Minister, after consultation with the Joint Command, may, by order subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, extend the period referred to in Section 4.3, it is being recommended that the Mount Salem Zone of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development measures be extended for a further 60 days. And in accordance with Section 6 of the Act, I will provide an overview of activities within the Mount Salem zone by tabling a ministry paper outlining same. And I'm taking a different approach, Mr. Speaker. The law requires the report. I will still give the overview, but I think it is a more tangible presentation in presenting a ministry paper. It will be presented today. So you can go through and see exactly all the actions taken by the Social Intervention Committee that was set up. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, I've also brought the Emergency Powers Continuance Number 4 Resolution 2018. Both matters will be pursued in one debate, but we would expect separate votes. I think it's just far better housekeeping to proceed since they deal with the same area and the same subject matter. For the Mount Salem zone, activities in the community have progressed steadily since its declaration as Jamaica's first zone of special operations, and that started on the 1st of September 2017. Today, the high rate of gang-related violence, which previously characterized the community and the police division by extension, is no longer at the level it was prior to the declaration of the zone. In fact, over the period 1st of September 2017 to the 11th of October 2018, the community experienced no murders or shooting incidents. Yes, I would. Let me knock on wood as I do it. But at this juncture, Mr. Speaker, it is important to say this to Jamaicans. No murders. And I'm very happy for that. But I'm even happier, no shooting incidents. Now, one of the complaints that the residents were making to me when I visited was they can sleep in peace, because MPs here who represent difficult communities would recognize that it is not just the murders that have the psychological impact. It is people irrationally and randomly getting up at night, pull up their guns, and just firing wildly and randomly. And then indiscriminately. And then the practice of somebody else answer them. So someone else in another adjoining community, they go for their guns and they fire. And everybody is in fear. And the people who have the guns know that this is a way of getting the community to fear them. Of course, they are not thinking fear. They are thinking this is a way to get the community to respect them. And hence, the control of the areas. So shootings, even if it doesn't result in death, is something that we have to pay close attention to, and the police records it. So it is not shooting that is merely an attempt, but the incidence of shooting has disappeared from the community. Now, if you live, for example, in Waterhouse, in my neighbor's constituency, where there are growing complaints, concerns, even appeal that they want a Zozo there. They want an intervention so that they can just sleep freely at night. Things like what you and I take for granted. They want to live in peace. They want to live in peace. I come into that. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mount Salem today is quite different from Mount Salem as at the 31st of August 2017. Quite different. It has taken us a long time to get to this point, and I'm not talking now 1 year or so of Zozo, 420 days of Zozo, but I'm talking now a long debate even before that as to how the government should respond to communities like Mount Salem, communities that are in crisis. The view has long been proposed, even in this House, and each time we have the debate, I can count on the member from St. Andrew Southwest and the member from St. Andrew South to say social intervention, right? On my side, the only reason why you don't hear it is because I am the only one who speaks. But if they were to insist on speaking, then I would face the same thing. Social intervention. And everyone who knows my history would know that I support that view totally. But there is a deficit in that proposition. And that is, if you were to take the level of social intervention spending that has gone on through JSIF, through Lift Up Jamaica before, through all the other social interventions, there are two things that have been absent from the social intervention spending. The first thing is the ability of the government to, well, let me not use the term ability. Let me say the commitment of the government to sustain the interventions. So we have had interventions, they have always been programmed, which means that they have a start date and they have an end date. And they have not been necessarily supported by an institution, they have been supported by projects. And so the intervention has a very short lifespan. The other thing is that I recall a debate several years ago when the member from Central Manchester was the Minister of National Security, and we were debating the high crime rate. And I pointed out to the member then that there are countries in the world, Haiti for one, who are much poorer than Jamaica, but have far less homicide rates. No, I pointed that out. Let's not make that the debate. So you can't recall. But the debate was that the murder rate in Jamaica is unusually high and cannot necessarily or always be ascribed to the social and economic conditions. There is a significant cultural variable that drives the resort to violence. So any intervention in the communities, in addition to, yes, we need to provide employment, we need to fix the roads, it must also address, why is it that our young men feel that they must associate in gangs? Why is it that for petty issues, the most extreme violence is brought to bear? And we must also acknowledge that in that kind of environment, you are almost in a situation where you have to conduct peacekeeping operations. And peacekeeping operations are never short engagements. They are usually very long engagements until you have resolved the core issues at play in the community. So the social intervention has to be parallel with the security intervention. Not security intervention in the sense of kicking off people's door and beating them up and so forth. The intervention has to be create an area that people feel secure, that they can have their rights preserved and secured, and that there is quick access to a system of justice. And that is the concept behind the zone of special operations. So it is bringing in the security and the social intervention. I am going to be very quick in saying to you that basically the two zones that we have are what we would call now the test cases. We have had a year and some months to study them, to see the shortfalls, to see what legislative changes need to be made, and yes, to answer the questions that the member from Southeast St. Andrew has raised. Why not more ZOZOs instead of SOEs? Or, well, let's not use the police presence alone, and I'm going to address that later on. To execute the operation of which I speak, which is this parallel strategy supported by an institution, it takes serious planning. It means that you have to increase your recruitment both in the army and in the police. We have to make budgetary allocations. So the Minister of Finance already knows what the outlay will be and how that will have to be programmed. So yes, there are more zones coming, right? So it's not the intention to just rely on SOEs. There are more zones coming, but because the engagement is not short term, they have to be planned properly. And we don't want to go and implement a ZOZO that is not adequately funded, where we know where we're going with it, and adequately resourced in terms of manpower. So that is coming, right? I've said in this House on many occasions that we have identified so far 20 communities. And they are dispersed all over. The member from Southwest would immediately know that one of her or two of hers would, and from South definitely, and the member from East Kingston and Port Royal, you and I definitely, from West Central and Western, Minister Grange, and there are others. I won't go into the details, but it is being worked out as we speak, both finances and how to increase the recruitment into both security forces, the JDF and the JCF, so that we have the manpower to deal with those areas. Let me talk now about, Mr. Speaker, I could go on to speak about what has happened in the zone, but I'll table that. I want to now go into the SOE. Mr. Speaker, if one were to retrospectively review the state of crime in St. James prior to the 18th of January 2018, when the state of public emergency was first declared, the homicide rate in the parish was 182 per 100,000. 182 murders per 100,000. Montego Bay, the population there would be close to about 300,000. It's less than that. It's 250,000 there above. But let's say at any one time you're looking at 300,000 if you were to include tourists, visitors, people from out of parish, right? So if you were to consider St. James a country, which by the way, St. James is about the size of Singapore. Singapore has 5 million people with a murder rate of practically zero. Right? St. James, if it were just a country, would be the highest, that would be the country with the highest homicide rate in the world. That is the reality. My point was that prior to the SOE, yes, the homicide rate was 182 per 100,000. And if St. James were a country, that would make it the highest homicide rate. Yes, I do recall you making that point. So, Mr. Speaker, the calling of the SOE, the state of public emergency, for St. James was without question justified because it was an emergency. And to be clear, I hold the view that I'm certain that the former Minister of National Security, I mean former as in the member opposite, who is edging closer to the seat of the leader of the opposition. I don't know why. But I'm certain that he, at some point in time, would have contemplated it. I'm certain that the member from Central Manchester, when he held the office of Minister of National, it would have crossed the mind of any Minister of National Security, the situation that was evolving in St. James. So it would not have come as a surprise. Indeed, what most people were saying is, why did we take so long in calling the state of public emergency? The truth is that you have to have the concurrence of the security forces to believe that they have the wherewithal and the capacity to manage the state of emergency. And again, you have to make the commitment of the resources to the state of emergency. And you have to try all other measures first before you use the state of public emergency. And in all cases, it is clear, Mr. Speaker, that the government of Jamaica, even before we did the SOE, we did the ZOZOs, and before the ZOZOs, at every upsurge, we sent in the JDF and we sent in extra. At one point in time, we had moved 150 JCF personnel into the space. So I'm making that point to answer the question raised by the member from Southeast St. Andrew about just sheer presence. It is an error to assume that the SOEs only bring presence. Let me just be clear. Putting the security forces in numbers in high-density urban situations without the cover of a state of emergency is not only a threat to citizens, it is also a threat to the security forces. You need to, when you are deploying in that way, you need to ensure that there is a structure that supports it. And that structure, the issue of detentions, the issue of, so, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be debating on the fly, but I'm hearing the Sotovoce remarks. I can respond quickly to some of them. The first thing is the state of public emergency establishes domain control, unlike any other measure provided in law. So the security forces know that they can control the space within the regulation. So it's a difference between having a curfew in a particular area versus knowing that you control all points of exit and entry into the area. It then changes your operational strategy. So when you just control one little area and you're trying to catch someone, you might rush in with aggression more than what you need. When you control all the areas, it's a different kind of operational strategy.
Prime Minister, just help me. A cordon could not establish that same domain presence and control?
Yeah, so a cordon gives you, the point I was making is that a cordon gives you very limited. That's what I was responding to. Yes, but very limited. It's for a short period of time. The administrative workup around it might give you some delay. But when you have the state of emergency declared, it is not just merely for a rushing emergency action. You now have a longer period to plan strategically. So the point I'm making is presence is always good, and you can use presence in some strategic responses. But when you're looking to have a total control of a situation, then it is best that when you are deploying in these numbers, that you give cover both to the citizens in terms of the regulations that pertain to the state of emergency, and to the soldiers and policemen who have to operate, right? So, I guess I agree presence could be a cause of the reduction, but it is more than presence. And I think I would like the members opposite to also acknowledge that it is more than presence. It is a strategic deployment, giving them the ability to take long-term operational decisions. So, Mr. Speaker, given the state of affairs today and the comparatively good results between 2017 and 2018 crime figures, and we can unequivocally say at this point that it has been successful in reducing murders. Mr. Speaker, the only thing I could ask is that the House considers extending the state of public emergency to the 31st of January 2019. Mr. Speaker, over the period 1st of January 2018 to the 11th of October 2018, the St. James Police Division accounted for 77 murders and 86 shooting incidents. Bear that in mind, 77 murders and 86 shooting incidents. This reflected a 53% decline and a 67% decline, respectively, in both murders and shooting incidents when compared to the same period in 2017, during which time there were 234 murders and 184 shootings. I think the statistics which are projected speak for themselves. Mr. Speaker, I don't need to go in too much other details. I believe I've taken enough time in explaining strategy and that it is working. Last point I would want to make for the consideration of members is that the leader of the opposition has always been reminding us that we need to it is now time to review and amend the anti-gang legislation. The Ministry of National Security is working on the amendments. We have named the committee, and very shortly the Minister of National Security should be calling the committee to start the review of the legislation. So I think, Mr. Speaker, we have a fairly comprehensive strategy. I'm not going to say to you it is a perfect strategy, but I repeat the point that the greatest outcome of proceeding like this is to demonstrate to the country that we have a unified position against crime, though there might be differences at the frills of the policy, but at the core of the policy, criminals cannot find succor in any one political organization. Once we approve, it is clear that criminals everywhere will come under the direct scrutiny and arm of the government. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is not new terrain we're on. We have been here for the fourth time now. This will be the fourth extension for the St. James state of emergency. And we have done a few extensions for the other areas, North St. Catherine and the first extension to in the corporate area. The issues raised have not changed. The concerns raised have not changed. So against that background, that the Prime Minister even went ahead to allude to some of those very recurring points that the opposition has raised and continue to have concern about. But at the outset, Mr. Speaker, I want to make the point that the people of Jamaica and the opposition welcomes any and every reduction of murder and shootings in the country. We yearn for that. We have been demanding for steps to be taken to halt the spiraling increase that we saw over 2016, 2017, that reached historic levels that we have never seen before because of inaction or inadequate action over the period. So that inaction, in fact, has helped to precipitate the crisis that led to finally some action by the government. And that final action has been the last and most extreme that is provided for constitutionally, which is the state of emergency. Well, let me correct myself. The ZOZO, which we were told is going to solve the crime problem one area at a time. I remember the member from Northwest St. James stood up and says, yes, we're going to fix it one zone at a time. Subsequently, the zone has been abandoned. Formally, informally abandoned. One more state of arms, ZOZO, in North St. Catherine. The second one, the increase in murders and shooting elsewhere. No more ZOZO. ZOZOs have been abandoned. And yes, Prime Minister, some of my colleagues from South St. Andrew and South West St. Andrew have made appeals for social intervention. I too, in the first debate, in fact said to you, Prime Minister, look at those indicators that would cause a ZOZO to be created and respond to them now to prevent them getting worse, to cause a ZOZO to be created. And you agreed with me. You agreed with me. The former Minister of National Security also agreed that, but we have seen no more ZOZO. That is a matter of fact. That's not an opinion. No more ZOZOs. And what we have had instead? States of emergency. That has been this grown-up strategy now to deal with the crime problem. No more ZOZOs, state of emergency. I am not creating this, Prime Minister. I'm only stating to what exists. It's the fact. No more state of emergency. No more ZOZO, state of emergency. So we are here now. We are here now. We are here now. Yes, we have some reductions in the murders. We have significant 271 less. Yes, I see the numbers. No denying that. What price we pay for that inaction that brings us to this point and what is being done. Bearing in mind, one of the information that we have asked for is the quantitative changes that have occurred in the ZOZO. We got one set at the last time, just on the eve. We have renewed the request. We haven't got it yet. I had dialogue with the minister, and he has promised to make those further details available to us. And Mr. Prime Minister, just in passing, you speak so much about the cooperation that you need from the opposition and the one voice that you need behind decisions like these. That one voice, Prime Minister, warrant the kind of sharing of critical, analytical information that can advise the opposition in forming its decision. That's what good governance is all about. It's not a one-upmanship. You just do what you want, ignore the request, and you just keep on going. We have decided to take a mature position and not to respond to that kind of treatment and to act the way that we have. We have done so in the interests of Jamaica, and we have done so as our effort to contribute towards a lesser challenging situation for Jamaican people. Mr. Prime Minister, you sought to preempt, and you know I was going to make the comment about the normalizing of the state of emergency, the indefiniteness of the state of emergency. You said it, but yes, man, I created it. Yes, yes. It makes the point. It makes the point. Yes, it makes the point deliberately. Prime Minister, we as MPs, we are on the ground. I tell you quite frankly, and I know more close to the St. Catherine state of emergency. I traverse that corridor more frequently than St. James state of emergency. It is becoming a normal activity. People just drive through with predictability of no check. I never said this before because I never want to seem like I'm compromising any security or everybody knows because they witness it. They make the same observation to me. And this is one of our concerns about the indefinite continuation of the state of emergency. Unimpeded, and the concern, you know, somebody reported to me recently that in the corporate era state of emergency, a lady went through and wasn't satisfied with the absence of check made on her. She turned around and told the security officer he's not doing his work. How is he certain that she has no contraband? The level of because if it happened to her and what she sees happens to other persons, she feels that the intended impact is being lost. And you are correct, Prime Minister, when you said people want to feel safe. One of my colleagues mentioned about the presence of the police. The people want the presence of the security so that they can feel safe. They don't necessarily want the state of emergency, you know. They want the sense of security which the presence of the security force brings with it. And yes, you made a point about more than just presence. Yes, as we mentioned, the state of emergency provides a certain level of protection for the security forces, immunity against prosecution and certain other actions provided for in the regulations. But as far as the citizens are concerned, what they want is a greater sense of security. They want to be able to walk the streets of Jamaica feeling safe and free. That's what we have been calling. That's what we have been calling for from day one. Now, as you have admitted, Prime Minister, the state of emergency cannot go on forever. It must end. What is the plan to provide that level of security and safe feeling on the part of the citizens of the country? That's where we are a little bit lost. We don't know because you won't tell us. You only tell us that there's a strategy. Nobody knows what the component of the strategy is. Nobody knows what the components of the plan is. All we hear, yes, dictators operate that way now. They say, don't worry about the process. Just rely on us. We will make it right. That's how dictators operate, you know. You don't have to know anything. Just obey what you are told. I know you don't want to go down that path, Prime Minister. So we are probably helping you to prevent at least that growing perception. The people need to know. And when we say we need to know, we don't need to know any operational details, Prime Minister. We're not that bad to expect to be told who is being investigated and for what. Nobody's asking for those details. What are those elements? Now, you mentioned about the Zozo and the state and the social intervention. Yes, it goes beyond fixing road and drains and so forth. Is to establish what are the causes. Establish what are the causes and to design specific interventions to deal with those. You mentioned also about the 20 communities which have been targeted. I don't know what are those 20, which communities are those. No, that can't be a secret. It can't be a secret, no, for the country as a whole. Because once you're going to make social intervention, you can't make it in the dark or in secret. Social intervention has to be in the open, and it has to engage all the various stakeholders in the communities. That is what a crime plan would encompass. Drawing into the center all the critical stakeholders, identifying their responsibilities, identifying what are the resource needs, do the necessary training that is necessary, do the necessary planning that is necessary. All of these are elements of a crime plan. But people can't participate into what they don't know. That's why the various stakeholder groups throughout the country has been making that request of you for over a year. They want to participate. They want to help. But they want some leadership in that direction, Prime Minister. So yes, we want the state of emergency and the ZOZO to end, but we want the kinds of intervention that can ensure that the communities remain safe when the state of emergency comes to an end. Prime Minister, one again recurring decimal. The police wage settlement. They are under severe strain. One officer called me last week at the station that the officer is stationed is 2 policemen in the station. 2. Because all the rest of them are taken out and placed in state of emergency operation. And they told me quite frankly, somebody come there with a complaint, they can't carry out any proper police procedure because of inadequate. I'm telling you what is reported to me. Right? And any police security manager, I won't. For security reasons I won't, but I'll tell the minister. I know. But I won't make you draw me into being irresponsible as you tend to be sometimes. I will provide that information to the minister. Right? No, I will name it to provide it to the minister. But the point is, whether it is named or not, or whether you believe it's fictitious or not, your own investigations can confirm it. So it's irrelevant what I said, it's what the facts are. Right? That situation cannot allow to prevail. Because those communities where the security forces are placed and they feel threatened, it doesn't help the morale of the police. So, Mr. Prime Minister, again, why is it that the wage settlement can't be resolved and come to an end? That question is very indicative. It is the police personnel that mans the state of emergency. And you know, Prime Minister, all of us know who have dealt with the portfolio. The resolution of the police with the Police Federation wage settlement is what lays the base for settlement of all the security personnel throughout the government service. All of them impinge on that one. So when we talk about settling the wage issue with the Federation, we're not just talking about the rank and file members of the JCF. We're talking about the entire security personnel cadre. That is why it is of critical importance. And the truth be told, Prime Minister, as any of your ministers who have had the experience of it will tell you, when they are even discontent at the officer level, because the JCF is at a lower level, they don't voice it, but they feel it. And they exercise it in different ways. We know these things. Anyone who have any experience with the public service and dealing with the security services understand this. And that's why there's always an urgency to settle with the Federation so that you can resolve it right across the whole system. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I plead, it's our duty. They are complaining that they are so dissatisfied and nobody don't even want to talk to them on the government side. Right? Well, settle the wage matter and nobody can argue about it. As I speak, it remains unsettled. That's not a matter of opinion, that's a matter of fact, Prime Minister. Once you solve it, it requires no explanation. And I make that request of you in that regard. Mr. Prime Minister, this extension is to take us into the next year, 1 complete year. I remember when you stood there at the first SOE and you said, we were criticized for doing nothing. Certain actions require careful and deliberate planning. We have done thorough and complete planning. That's why the state of emergency was just now coming into being. Do you remember those words, Prime Minister? I remember them and I reread them. It's 1 year now, Prime Minister. All the excellent and deliberate planning that you spoke of. It's 1 year. We hope, Prime Minister, that even though the planning and the preparation was not done, and bear in mind, these states of emergency span 2 fiscal years. 2 fiscal years. So there was enough time for the planning and the budgetary allocation to support it. Right? The government had the opportunity to do that planning and preparation, as you had mentioned, to come to the country and to seek whatever material, financial support it needs to execute it in an effective way. We are hopeful, Mr. Prime Minister, that this time around you have had enough time to fix those plans that were made, make them right, make them better, so that the state of emergency can come to an end and a plan and a program put in place to sustain the reductions that we have attained so far. And I really want to praise the security forces because, the truth be told, they have conducted themselves in a way, both the JSF and the JDF, that we can applaud. As Jamaican security personnel, we want to applaud them, because the security forces must never conduct themselves in a way that the people of the country see them as an enemy. And so far, overall, the report is not something to really worry too much about. Right? So, Mr. Prime Minister, in closing, we are not going to oppose it. As I said earlier on, we believe, notwithstanding everything else, we will give what support we can to cauterize the spiral in murder that we experienced over the past 2 years. So, on that note, we commit ourselves not to oppose it and to allow for it to continue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the Prime Minister is aware of the recently released study by the Inter-American Development Bank entitled Better Spending for Better Lives, How Latin America and the Caribbean Can Do More with Less, the gist of which is that the nations such as Jamaica with severe crime problems are encouraged to spend smarter and not necessarily more to reduce crime. Last week, in response to the Minister of Justice's report on the state of the courts, he noted with chagrin that the majority or a large preponderance of the new criminal charges before the court involved young men. And I asked him the question, why? What is the background to that? And I don't recall. I don't think he was able to, or he gave an answer. It's the same question I'm asking the Prime Minister now. He spoke of the need to confront the ingrained culture of violence. And everything that we do, and especially when we curtail, as we are agreeing to do, the rights of people in order to suppress violent crime, we must ask ourselves some profound questions as to the etiology, the nature of the crime that we are facing. And secondly, we must be clear in the measures that we are taking, not vague, clear and focused that we are taking in this regard. I would have been pleased to have seen the report on the social interventions prior to making this engagement, but I understand that is to come. The premier anthropologist and student of crime in Jamaica, Dr. Herbert Gale of the university, has indicated that tackling crime has to be done at 3 levels, and he follows the Inter-American study that I'm quoting in this regard. And he asserts that our policy, because it is our policy if we all agree to it, is focusing on the last 2, the secondary and tertiary measures, rather than the first. Primary means preventive, and that is going to come about from social services, a justice system that gives people a sense that there is justice, and access to education for all. Dr. Gale, who is doing a particular series of studies now in some of the communities that I believe will comprise those mentioned for further action by government, indicates that in those communities, some 50%, there are communities, I quote him, in Jamaica, where 50% of the boys are out of school. This is a real difficulty. The average is about 20%. Of our school children are absent every day. But there are communities that it is as high as 50% for boys particularly. And this leads to a specific measure which I invite government's consideration of. The study itself referred to, and Dr. Gale's own work and that of his team at the university, indicate 2 areas of particular vulnerability. One is the single parent families, where violence has been he uses the term torture, has been the norm of discipline, either in respect of intergender violence or in respect of the correction of children, and invites us to pay particular and strategic attention through the measures of the Social Development Commission, other non-government agencies, to attend to those families which inevitably and statistically verifiably produce repeat killers. Repeat killers indicate or are responsible for some 54% of murders, his studies indicate. They're not new. Now, in those circumstances, I'm trusting that the social intervention that is being proposed, and hopefully may already be underway, will speak to that specific subgroup. It is a way of targeting limited resources for special attention, and I invite that. The second thing has to do with education, Mr. Speaker. If young men are kept in school, and particularly if there are programs that will attract their attention, uniform groups, technical studies to which they are inclined, despite the vulnerability of their demographic background, they are likely to stay out of the gangs. It is not beyond our resources, our present resources and our wit, to ensure that a particular targeting be done for that class of young person. And if we do this, I believe that the social intervention, which we all want to see expanded and to work better, can be more focused and specifically targeted. The study goes on to indicate that in the Caribbean countries, more is invested of the security spend on the police, followed by criminal justice, and then prisons. And in comparison with the rest of the world, given an average relative efficiency of 70%, I'm quoting, the view is held that if more were spent on targeted interventions and less upon crime suppression, you would have more crime reduction. And specifically, Dr. Gale notes, as does the study, that Jamaica leads the region with more than 80% of its security expenditure on the police and spends less than 5% on the justice system and a little under 15% on prisons. And of course, there are even lower levels of expenditure on other areas, such as those mentioned, and particularly, Mr. Speaker, on the area of research into the origins of crime. This Honourable House appears to be taking a decision, despite many misgivings and many conditionalities, that we need these measures to continue for this period. It is very important that we strengthen them and, as indeed the Prime Minister said, arrange parallel, not just diffuse measures of social intervention, but very targeted ones. And I'm recommending particularly that the special effort in the education system to keep boys in school, and also the outreach to those homes that are particularly vulnerable and where there is a history of violence. Violence becomes intergenerational very easily, you know, sir. That is the background of the culture of which we speak. Those measures could be of great assistance and very affordable and very practical in these circumstances. Thank you.
Prime Minister. Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I am happy for the reductions in the areas, the reductions in violent crime, particularly murders and shootings in the areas where there are states of emergency, particularly St. James, which we're focused on today. But I would want to draw the attention of the Prime Minister and the Minister to the fact that, notwithstanding the 3 concurrent states of emergency running in different geographic areas across Jamaica, just last week, there were still 32 murders. Yep. These are not my figures. I'm just doing the deduction from one week to another in the figures published by the JCF. 32 murders. That's almost just under 5 per day, with 3 states of emergency running at the same time. In my own constituency, Prime Minister, on Saturday morning, holiday weekend, over the holiday weekend, I believe it was Saturday morning, 11 a.m. approximately in the morning, broad daylight, 5 persons shot, 2 fatally, in what would normally be a relatively quiet parish in the sense of violent crime. Well, it is suspected that the target of that shooting was Bumed, the leader of the Grey Ground Gang, who was shot but not fatally. The link I want to make, Prime Minister, is that twice per week, a fighting patrol of 8 policemen and a vehicle is taken from Manchester Police Division and sent to St. James to support the security operations down there. It is precisely that type of fighting patrol which would have been needed to respond to the carload of gunmen that came up and shot up that playfield in 3 Chains. So the Manchester Police, which already has very thinly stretched resources, both from personnel and vehicles, have to sacrifice even more to support St. James. 4 days of the week they lose 1 by 7, the inspector times plus 7 other ranks to go to St. James. The travel time, etc., they're lost to the Manchester police for 4 days per week. This is just a small contribution from one of the 19 police divisions to support the states of emergency. And I imagine that Manchester is not targeted in particular, but at every police division has to give up some resources to support the concentration in the other areas. What I think we should also note is that the police tell us that one of the principal income-earning activities of this grey ground gang is extorting scammers. Now, are these only homegrown scammers from Manchester, or are we having scammers displaced from St. James or other areas where there's this concentration of security forces? Yeah. And so what we might be seeing in a sense is the classic balloon effect, where when you squeeze St. James, some of the criminals run to another area. I don't know if that is the case. This just happened, and I know the police are making investigations. But it's quite plausible, because I hear persons even in gated communities in Upper St. Andrew complaining that they see men popping up, hanging out at renting units, hanging out at the pool, seem to have nothing to do during the working week, except they have an array of phones in front of them and accompanying them all the time. So what I'm pointing out, Prime Minister, is that a strategy has to be a national strategy. Yes, we have to respond to flare-ups wherever they occur, and sometimes that response has to be saturation level policing for short or medium term periods. But we can't forget the rest of the island at the same time. And the fact that we still last week, with all these states of emergency, with all the additional resources that have been put into the Ministry of National Security, the JDF and the JCF, that we still see this level of murder across the country. Well, we don't know, because as I pointed out in my contribution the last time, as I pointed out the last time, but I wouldn't expect you to understand that correlation is not causation. And many others have raised that up. Leslie, beg you break it down for Darifon. But the point is, Prime Minister, is that, the SOEs by themselves, particularly one in St. James, which we all supported. And you even raised the question that it must have crossed my mind, because it did, quite frankly. And I did consult the leaders of the security forces at the time, and they advised against it. So it never went any further. And in fairness to them, because I don't want to suggest that it's inconsistent, as bad as St. James was at the time, it wasn't near where it was last year. So I think we all agreed that St. James was a case that warranted and met the criteria that needed an urgent, extraordinary type response. But as we know, as it now becomes a more routine operational response, then we have to start raising some of the issues that we've raised in other debates. And just since you mentioned, Prime Minister, in an earlier debate where you and I were discussing the issue of Haiti, just want for the record, because I don't want to have to go back to the tape, just want to correct you. You were making a point about economic growth being important to help alleviate the conditions that encourage crime in some of the low-income communities. It was I who used the example of Haiti to suggest there was not a direct correlation, even though I agree that in... Shut your mouth, no man. Even though I agree that that's one of the conditions that obviously can encourage, and not just the low income, but the lack of infrastructure, etc. But there's a cultural element to it, which is what I think you were pointing to, that goes beyond just a straight correlation between opportunities, whether in jobs or otherwise. And the scamming is an example of that. We have found over the years that many of the participants in scamming are persons who also could have had a fairly good, legitimate career path, but many of them have and freelance with that as well. But just because from a character point of view, they don't see it as a bad thing, as a reprehensible thing. It is not, they're not ostracized by the communities that they live in, by the families who must see that they're doing these things, and therefore there is a sort of cultural acceptance, let's call it, which really is a dysfunctional feature of our culture now. And it is something that we have to, while we're addressing everything else from the security operations, so I want to tie that back in with the comment my colleague from Central Kingston made, that the preventative is more important in the long term. And finally, Prime Minister, as we're coinciding both these debate on, or combining the debate both on the extension of the state of emergency and the ZOSO, I want to remind you, when the original ZOSO legislation was passed, part of the rationale for it was that we would have created an intermediary level between normal policing and a state of emergency. No, but it did create that. It did create the extra, whereas normally the military, for example, can only operate in support of policing, and any military patrol would have to have at least a constable with them in order to operate. When we passed the ZOSA legislation, it created a new concept of the joint command, where soldiers could operate essentially with the powers of a constable. In the state of emergency, it kicks it up even another level, where in some sense the military command almost takes primacy in that sense. So we seem to have now forgotten that there is a step between the state of emergency and stepping it right back down to normal policing operations. And I want to suggest to you, Prime Minister, that while we may not want to set a timetable, a finite timetable, but in a sense, if you don't set a timetable, then it is indefinite. No, you want to say it's not indefinite. But if it's not definite, then it's indefinite. It's a little, I don't want it to be those semantics. But there is an opportunity. The Zones of Special Operation Act was so broad that there's nothing that stops, for example, the entire St. James from being a zone of special operation. There's nothing that stops it. Maybe not in the particular concentrated policing way that it was done initially. But since that clear type operation would have receded long into the past, not just in Mount Salem, but in the entire St. James, then I want to suggest to you that one option for the next time that we come back to look at this issue in Parliament in January, that one option would be not necessarily to step from a state of emergency to nothing, but to expand the area that's called the zone of special operations to a wider area than just Mount Salem. Thank you.
Mrs. Burke.
Permission to speak from a seat other than my own. Okay. Mr. Speaker, I had wanted to join my voice in the discussion that we're having around the extension of both the ZOZO and the state of emergency in St. James. I was listening rather to the Prime Minister in his presentation, and I was struck by a couple of things. One is, and I understand not wanting, although he has placed it on record and it is circulated, to put some of the details in terms of the social intervention. But I really believe that the Jamaican government in particular, over the years, and it spans administration, I believe that we take a particular approach to information that is not helpful. I think we believe that information should be held and kept close to our chest instead of sharing it. And I believe that it is important for us to get to a point where we do understand that sharing information sometimes helps us in doing what we need to do and in bringing citizens along with us. As the member from South St. Catherine said, I'm not talking about information that is going to give away state secret and that is going to detail, put in the public view the finer details of a security plan. That's not what I'm talking about. But we need far more data than I see being presented. I remember in a couple of the earlier presentations that we would have been given, for example, how many persons were actually detained, how many were prosecuted, and all of that. The fact that the data revealed that we needed to be more strategic, more data-driven, more evidence-based in terms of the persons we detain and not just scraping up people, and we were talking about it, is no reason not to continue to present it. Because when you present it, it is also something that the joint forces will look at too, because they too must be looking at how they improve those numbers as they go along. And I think it is important. It is very important. I am moved to speak today because although I have been sent here by the people of Southwest St. Andrew, they also understand that they have brothers and sisters in all the parishes across Jamaica. And so what happens in St. James affects them too. In fact, I speak as well as a member of parliament where I have certain sections of the community where the state of emergency is in operation. And therefore, I now have a first-hand knowledge of some of the operations. And I want to put some of that on the table, because I believe that when any of these, whether it's those or the state of emergency, when they are set up, there needs to be a clear notice to the public about how they get information about those who are detained. Yeah? I don't believe that it is clear enough, and I don't believe that the public fully understands. So when someone is taken up, for example, the loved ones, the parents and relatives are going around almost like a headless chicken trying to get information. Where have they taken my son or my cousin or my whatever? Regardless of the reason for which the person has been detained, whether it is that it is someone of interest and therefore should have been detained, or it is someone who has been caught in the detentions that are happening, it doesn't matter. I believe that their loved ones should have access to that kind of information so that they can follow up. What many do in the absence of that is that they go to try and find a lawyer to simply get information. Money that they can ill afford, but given their past history with the police forces, not everyone is at a point where there is full confidence. Yeah? Given where their interaction is, they want to make sure that their loved ones are protected, and at least someone with some better understanding of the legal process is able to speak on their behalf. And I believe we can do better than that. I think we owe it to the citizens to do better than that in terms of providing the kind of information for them to begin to get that, to query what's happening with their loved ones. It is true that the Zozo state of emergency puts additional boots on the ground. I hear the Prime Minister saying not the only thing, fine, but it does. And it is true that that in and of itself is important, because in many cases it makes a big difference to what takes place on the ground and how people move and how those individuals who are not law-abiding citizens, how they operate and how they curtail their activities. And so it is always welcome from that perspective. I also, though, want to join with the member from Central Kingston about it's not just the importance of the social intervention. It's not just that it is one aspect that must be included and should not be ignored. I believe that we have not, and certainly I have not heard it coming from the Prime Minister in his statements, that he is sufficiently seized of the impact in the long term and the overall, and the difference it could make if we really put our minds to looking creatively at how we could begin to introduce more social intervention in these communities that we believe are so bad, so vulnerable, that we need to declare a state of emergency. I believe that we are reneging on our responsibility if we simply say that we don't have the resources, it is expensive, and we do not knock our heads together to find creative ways of getting those resources unleashed and working in our communities. There still is room for some kind of volunteer activity. There is still room for corporate citizenship at work and partnerships, whether it is that there is some amount of trade of some credits, whatever. I believe that if this is not just a ticking of the box, if it is that we truly are interested in reducing crime and dealing with some of the underlying issues, those causation, that have led us here, if that is so, I believe we have to go beyond the rhetoric of saying we do not have enough resources, we don't have the money for it. Where we are, we have to begin to understand that we are at a point in history where more has to be done than the tinkering that we are doing. It is absolutely not sufficient. And finally, I was just going through some of the, even the social services, the social intervention. And I believe that where we have output, Mr. Prime Minister, I would want to see something more. I want to see something more. I don't want to see 3 drains cleaned and the removal of 24 truckloads. No, I want to also see that there has been some kind of public education with the communities around about how garbage is disposed of. I want to see that we have commissioned additional monitors so that there are individuals in the community doing that. I believe that we want to go a bit further. And I believe, I believe that we are taking the easy road out. And I believe that when we on this side speak, there is a level of arrogance that comes from members on the benches in front of me that is also totally acceptable, because I believe that what we are seeking is a solution that has the common understanding of all of us, and we will not get it if some of the members on those benches have the kind of attitude that I see emanating from those benches. It is not helpful. And in a quiet moment, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm going to ask you, as you listen, when you get into that room, to talk with them as well. Thank you.
Prime Minister, I said the last time that I had listened to a number of the debate, mainly because whenever the member from Southwest spoke, she spoke generally to the conditions that exist in parts of my constituency. The member from South St. Andrew as well speaks to some of the conditions in my constituency. You, Prime Minister, in your address, in your presentation, mention and recognize that increasingly in parts of our constituency where we join our borders come together, that there are an increase, an uptick in the level of violence and the incidence of violence. Some of it quite outrageous, bordering on terrorism. A couple nights ago, 3 or 4 houses were set on fire, and members and persons shot in the community. Last evening again, a similar thing. And I remember when we started this debate, and the second or third extension, the question was being asked as to whether we are going to wait for those communities that are not yet at the level of violence, as Mount Salem or elsewhere, but for which there was clear signs that there are tension and that there are sporadic incidents of violence, and whether we are going to wait until those slip into and fall over into the category, and that what you have is an increased level of violence. And part of what was being sought was not only social intervention, it was recognized that more boots on the ground was needed, more patrols, a greater presence in some of these communities, even as we address some of the other issues. And Prime Minister, I can tell you, some of your ministers will tell you that I have been, with respect to social intervention, I have identified, I've been working at particular aspects of that with private sector. I happen to, our constituency happen to be in the, from that time we've been doing the CSJP intervention. We work with the private sector as well. Tomorrow I have a meeting with them on other aspects of some of the solution. But what I've seen and what causes me again to stand to speak this time again is that from the last time I spoke in the South on this matter, when the matter of Denham Town and North Clarendon was brought, the matter as the situation and the incidents have increased significantly. And so we see an uptick in that, and the response from the police, and the police is very aware because we've had conversation, been very engaged in conversation with the police, is that the strain, and especially now with the declaration of the SOE, right, it is clear that the resources are stretched and are being strained. And so, Prime Minister, we're in a situation where it is not simply that there's a resource shift in terms of social intervention. There's a resource shift of boots on the ground and capacity as well. And so the argument that is being made and urged is that a national strategy has to emerge. A year to assess the ZOZO and what it means and how it is to be done, that is good. But you still have situations that are emergent situations requiring attention, because if we don't, and we simply wait until we get all the data is in and we're able to study them, then I fear that some of them will become part of that statistics as well. And so I know, we are seeing an uptick, and it is not for lack of concern and intervention, but there are endemic problems. And I agree with you that there are some of those issues are long-standing issues, and for which we have to get to the number of it and the core of it. But it is a situation where young men in communities are being threatened that if you don't take sides, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. If you don't take sides with them, then you're part of the problem. And when they relocate from that community to other community, then they are followed, and that community gets embroiled in some of those issues as well. So it's a creeping situation, and it needs attention, and part of it is police presence, but another part of it is, again, the social intervention mixed in with it. And therefore, the issue about zoos and how expensive they are, I hear and I understand, but if it works, and if that is the effective response to it, then as a country, as a nation, as a country, we're going to have to find the resources to deal with it. And so, Prime Minister, I urge that situation in the border between Capture and in Lyricon and that part of your constituency, that needs urgent attention. Urgent attention. I request of you.
Mr. Speaker, I have two very short points. And one relates to an operational issue in how the states of emergency are administered on the ground. It came to my attention that over the weekend, 8 ladies were detained. I think they had been playing dominoes outside premises after the cutoff time, and they were detained. I think maybe they resented being asked to stop playing dominoes. I'm not vouching for that, but they were detained. And the effect of that detention was that they couldn't be processed until the next day. Now, all of them are mothers, single mothers. It meant that their children had to do without their mothers and I believe this was actually Thursday, last week Thursday, because the following day was a school day. And it just seemed to persons on the ground and to me that where women are being detained who are mothers, the processing of those cases should be prioritized so that they can be released on the same day that they're held. Because when they're held overnight, you do have a major disruption in the lives of their children, their ability to get ready for school and so on. And in the case of a long weekend, even more drastic dislocation of the family. So I had mentioned this to the ground commander, one of them, and he accepted that it was a valid point and said he would take it further, but I haven't attempted to follow up. But I thought it was an important enough point to mention here, because these are sort of things that can make a big difference to the lives of the citizens and the way in which this peculiar legal regime in which they now live affects their daily lives. The other point I wish to make is really a drafting point, and it relates to the ZOSO order. And it's really to do with the way in which the time frames are expressed in the order. If you look at the State of Emergency Extension Order, it says the date to which it is extended. It gives a specific date. In the case of the ZOSA order, what we have is an initial date, which was September the 1st, 2017. And then we have a series of 7 paragraphs extending that date by 60 days each, without actually saying in each instance when it expires. The effect of that is that you have to go through a calculation to work out when the current one expires. And based on, in fact, I went through that calculation, sitting and listening to you, Prime Minister, and it is, by my calculation, which may be wrong, but it's around the 25th of this month that it expires, the current one, which means that the next 60 days would expire just before Christmas Eve. Now, I'm just raising this because I think people may have assumed that the 60 days would run from well, I don't know what people would have assumed, but not many people in here would know when the current one expires unless they went through the mathematical or arithmetical exercise of working it out. And it's an easy thing to cure. It's simply to say where it says extended for a further period of 60 days from the end of the period referred to in paragraph G until and a date, which is how the state of emergency resolution is worded. And then there'd be no room for any ambiguity or uncertainty as to when it actually ends. And given that police powers, law enforcement powers are impacted by the duration of the order, I think it's quite important that a precise date be set. So I just mentioned this so the next time round, I know we can't amend this now, but next time round it would be helpful to have the specific date that it continues until actually stated in the order. Yeah.
Prime Minister, I don't know what you've counted, but remember there is a process by which you count, as set out in the Interpretation Act. So I'm not sure if your counting is correct in terms of the end date.
As I said, I don't have the Interpretation Act before me to further complicate the matter. I have just simply said 60 days from September 1 is when it expired, and another 60 days, and another 60 days. If you look in a year, in some months it's 20, like February is 21 days, some are 31, some are 30. All I'm saying is it would be better from a precision point of view to state when the date when it actually expires. That's all I'm saying.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker, just to say that I rise to support the resolutions calling for the extension of the St. James state of emergency and the zone of special operations. And just to commence where the member from St. Catharines South ended, I think there is always room for improvement. And so there is nothing wrong with how the order is drafted, but certainly the other style has reading ease, and so that can be adopted. But there is nothing wrong with how it is drafted, and that needs to be made clear. Mr. Speaker, the state of emergency in St. James and the zone of special operations in Mount Salem have direct impact on my constituents. And I say that those I represent and those that I interact with in the parish have expressed almost a unanimous view that what is happening in St. James is positive and it should be continued. Mr. Speaker, a lot of concerns have been raised in the debates along the way calling for extensions of the operations. And I think it is worth putting on record something that seemed to be slipping away. There is a call for more policing, and I think that's a fair call. We have seen what the absence of the state and the absence of law enforcement has resulted in, a vacuum that has been filled by others, which continue to challenge us. But I think as concerns are raised, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that among the many positives that have come from the states of emergency and the zones of special operation is almost a reculturalizing of the security forces. Mr. Speaker, not so long ago, and in fact our law books are replete with cases of findings of the court of law enforcement agents operating contrary to the law. Use of excessive force, excessive use of force, and we see the liability of the state in many of those cases. This administration spent a lot of time working out an operation in a rights-based context. And I think everyone who has spoken and has commended the work of the security forces, that commendation is a direct result of the work put in behind the scene. Streamlining, training. So we move from policy to law, increase in budget, and a number of things. So when I hear the talk about what is a strategy, I wonder, Mr. Speaker, what is it that people are looking at? Because there is no single ingredient. And every aspect that the experts have called for, every aspect is present in the work that this administration is doing. Mr. Speaker, I also have to speak on a matter that leaves me with a lot of questions. Because as I listen to members who represent constituencies where their predecessors in office have been there for a long time, decades, and I hear about the absence of amenities, the absence of infrastructure, it really begs the question as to what was happening over all the years. And I'm not being critical. I think it operates on both sides. But it really is asking us to look very carefully on what we are doing in the constituencies that we're elected to represent. Because for my part, I find it very sad, very unfortunate that any constituency could be represented by persons who have held the highest political office. And then you hear of the absence of programs. I have to, no, it is of concern. It is of concern. And as we are calling, it is of concern.
Order, please, order, order.
Concern. But it is of concern to you. It is of concern.
Members, let's have some.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not raising it to point finger. I'm simply saying it begs the question. It begs the question. What has been happening? The other thing, Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat, all round it begs the question. And I think if we take on a defensive posture, we may never find the answers. The other thing that worries me, Mr. Speaker, the other thing that worries me is the extent to which crime has been normalized in our society, the extent to which we are prepared to accept the intrusion on the rights of the citizens by the criminal element. And when the state begins to take action, there is an outcry. And you're taking action in a way that is seeking to ensure that guaranteed rights are protected. It is a hot button issue. It is a hot button issue because we have to take stock of what has happened in this country. Mr. Speaker, the work to be done is not limited to the work of the political directorate. The work to be done is not limited to the work assigned to the political directorate. You know, Mr. Speaker, I am hearing the member. Mr. Speaker, you know, it's ironic. I remember some of the criticisms about the ZOSO, and as far as I'm hearing, everybody wants a ZOSO because you're seeing the results. You're seeing no, just hear me out. Just hear me out. The model of the legislation is what is required. Mr. Speaker, I close by saying that I support the resolution and I'm happy for an indication of support by the other side. May it so please.
Mr. Daly.
Mr. Speaker, I am asking for one now. Asking for a ZOSO now. I need some of these things.
Members, let's have some
Mr.
order.
Speaker, I would like to, at the outset, indicate, as we have said over and over, any initiative to reduce crime and violence in our country will have the support of the opposition. You have an emergency? You're going to march? I thought you were going on a march. Make sure you have life jacket this time. If you're good, make sure. No, I'll be short. I will be short. But I have said to myself, every time you come here for an extension, I will speak. And I will speak because I have some fundamental issues relating to the state of emergency and the Zozo. As I said on the last occasion, you don't need a Zozo and you don't need a state of emergency for certain social programs, social interventions to occur in any challenged inner city area of Augustown, of Tivoli Gardens, Denham Town, Majestic Pen, wherever, Frog City, Kellits, Arthur Seat, Good Hope, wherever, that needs social intervention. And I became very curious when I saw Ministry Paper 9918. 9918. And I went through carefully. And I said to myself, drain cleaning, these are the things that took place in Mount Salem. This is first of all, I want to know, is this only related to Mount Salem as it is said at the caption, or it is Mount Salem and Denham Town? I just want to know. Mount Salem. And I have to ask my friend, the Prime Minister, this question. I wouldn't put it in it. Do you need a Zozo to have rodent control in a community? No. Do you need a Zozo to be able to remove zinc fences? Has been a program introduced years ago. Do you need a Zozo to have a health fair? Do you have a Zozo? Do you need a Zozo to deliver back to school activities? This is normal things that members of parliament do and councillors do. Normal things. Do you need a Zozo for civil registry, for JCIF to pay for 230 birth certificates? I have no problem for people to get birth certificates. And I repeat what I said the last time. On the 27th of April, and the Thursday, and the following week, I invited Registrar General into Kellits at the Kellits Yam Festival. They registered 289 without Zozo. They went to Croftsill the following week. They did, I think, 300 and something without Zozo. The cost, Mr. Minister of Health, from the Registrar General Department, the invoice that they sent me, that I have to pay from my CDF, is $595,000 that my CDF have to pay for. But I know, so you don't need a Zozo to have sports and recreational activities. No, I said to myself, JCIF, for 100 youngsters for summer camp. You don't need a Zozo to put on a summer camp. Why? All right. So I welcome these activities. For the people of Mount Salem on behalf of the taxpayers of Jamaica. I welcome them. But we want some of it too in other places of Jamaica. We want them in all the gardens. My other point, Mr. Prime Minister, we would be happy if this lovely ministry paper, with all these roads paved and so on, do you have a cost? Can you give the Parliament how much has been spent? We would need that. How much has been spent coming out of this ministry paper in Mount Salem? This is really, it's good intervention, you know, good social intervention. But we need to know how much has been spent. Here is my problem. Here is my problem with all of the two initiatives, with both of them. The Mount Salem area had a gang called Supermarket Unknown, G-City Gang, Waltham Wees Gang, Fellman Gang, Corner Gang, Ratty Gang, Wilmot Gang, Vietnam Spratter Gang, Uptown Gang, Green Dot Gang, West Side Rebels, Gym Team Gang, and the Canterbury Nation Cross Gang. These are gangs that were in the area of Mount Salem. That is my point. I have asked the security forces when they appeared before us, how many of these gangs have been dismantled? How many of these gang leaders have been arrested? How many of the term that you have coined, you should patent it, the producers of violence. How many of these producers, is that you? First I hear it. How many of these producers of violence are behind bars right now? And that is where you're going to test not just the 600 and odd searches of people, the 194,000 stops that you do for traffic, the tickets you serve, the people you arrested. That's good. But the aim of the state of emergency and the aim of the Zozo is to arrest these gangs and put them behind bars, put them away, so that the people can have permanent calm after Zozo, because it cannot be forever. The state of emergency cannot be forever. We are not in the time of military states in South and Central America, when everyone except Costa Rica was under military rule. We are in Jamaica. Therefore, it cannot be it forever. It must come to an end. And therefore, for these things to take place, you have to rethink the strategy. Because it's not just the murder rate nationally, right now for a year or 9 months. What will happen after the police and soldiers pull out? I support, as you know, we would like to have the calm, would like you for Jamaica to proceed, but there are questions to be answered. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, as usual, it is very enlightening to hear the responses from members of the House. I want to thank the member from South St. Andrew, who always has very insightful legal observations, and the both observations made are accepted. I have made a note about the processing of mothers quickly, and the issue of defining the date is one that does no harm to the legislation, but just advance it. So we accept that. The issue of the study raised by the member from Central Kingston, I have not had the full study. I have not had the benefit of reading it, save and except what was published in the papers. From an intuitive perspective, and this is without reviewing the matter, I don't think it is an accurate depiction of the situation in Jamaica, because the social intervention is significant. If you look at what JSIF currently spends, which is billions of dollars, in selected communities and selected projects, those are huge interventions. Put with that path, put with that what we're doing, the HOPE program, put with that the CDF, it is significant. The demand that is being made, and which throws up a certain conflicting position, member from Central Kingston, is you would have heard the passionate defense, advocacy put up by the opposition spokesman on national security, saying that the government must spend more on security. We must increase the security budget. Hold on, because that's the argument. If you look at the security budget, a large part of that is remuneration. That's not beside the point. What I'm saying is that if you're making an argument, you have to be consistent. On one hand, you can't say, increase the security budget, and then on the other hand say, you have to spend less on security and more on intervention. I'm just saying that these arguments need to be resolved a little bit more, but I would hasten to add that you have to take the security expenditure not just for what it is nominally, but you have to put it against what you actually need. And if you look at Jamaica's security architecture, it is very much insufficient. So you would recall, member, that a country like Jamaica, which is really a maritime nation, it's in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, we had no ships. We could not adequately protect our borders. We had to make an expenditure on these high capital value equipment. Obviously, it will skew, and these are expenditures that you don't just make them in one budget year, you have to make them over several years. So what I'm saying is, member, is that it's very hard for me to make a comment on I haven't read it, but just from what I know, if Jamaica is spending highly on national security, it would be spending on ensuring that we are at least at the minimum requirements to secure our nation. And secondly, that we are able to meet a satisfactory resolution to the wage claims of the members of the security forces. And I think that we are not in any way spending over and above what is required to secure Jamaica. I would also say, member, that the spending on intervention clearly is not sufficient. But we have to be more targeted. And that is where our efforts are now, being targeted. I want to point out, again, hearing the member from Northern Clarendon speaking passionately that you don't need a Zozo to spend on drains. You don't need that is intuitive, obviously. But I want you to think a little deeper. That there are communities in which you cannot clean the drain because you have to go through the dun. There are, but look at that argument. Look at that response. Send the soldier there. Send the soldier there. It's a classic. Look at that argument. Send the soldier there. Classic. I mean, you have to be consistent in your argument, member. There are communities, and look, members, I think, members, there are communities in Jamaica Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd really like to make my point with the attention of the members.
Order, please. Permit to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members,
if the members would do me the courtesy of allowing me to make the point.
Mr. Daly.
There are communities, Mr. Speaker, where it is well known that works, civil works, public works, are difficult to execute because of the presence of criminal enterprise. There's no question about that. There are communities where we know that the work, just for no reason, was stopped. And when you get to the bottom of it, we have to find another word other than done. some criminal has exerted improper pressure on contractors and others to stop the work. What the point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is a point I made earlier, that we have always been doing intervention. The missing piece is the institutions to sustain the intervention, and secondly, you can't develop without peace. So it's one thing to have a done, but when that done creates a situation where there is no peace or pretends to be the peacekeeper in the area, then you are throwing money down the drain. Until we make both things operate in parallel, and that is where we are now with the zones of special operation. You are able to do that in Kellits. Knock on wood, Kellits is not taken over and run as a separate state. The people there can operate freely as citizens, and we are happy for that. But there were communities, member, and I'm saying that the way in which we have structured our interventions is to address those communities. Mr. Speaker, I believe the points are well made. I believe that the debate is, I'll yield for the member.
Mr. Prime Minister, we have a Christmas culture in our country. And Christmas culture, the celebration of the birth of Christ, is a special time of the year. Certainly it's one of my favorite times of the year. And the spirit of the season keeps our people going. Spiritual and religious activities, commercial activities. I'm seeking to find, is there any plan, any provision for the Christmas season? Is there going to be a grand marketing? Yes. Excuse me? Yes, grand marketing. What? Thank you.
Yeah, so I was closing, and I'm going to answer your question, member. Just closing by saying that the debate has certainly helped me in understanding what needs to happen in terms of tweaking policies. And I think that the debate is good for the public as well, so that there is no herd mentality in thinking that we're running down a road with a wrong path, that there is criticism, and we can recalibrate. And questions like what is asked of the member of North Central St. Catherine helps to ensure that we are making the policy relevant and responsive. So yes, we have started the contemplation of how we will handle the commercial districts in the Christmas period. So to ensure that not just the ability of persons to observe the birth of Christ in the traditional ways, but the commerce that surrounds that season as well, that is not impeded. So all of those things are being considered. You would have seen that we have been able to, within the zones of special operations and within the state of emergency, make the relevant provisions. Certainly, Reggae Sumfest was one in which we made a provision. It operated seamlessly. There was no complaint. The same kind of approach, collaborative approach, will be taken. Mr. Speaker, may it please you, I urge you to put the resolutions to the members for their approval.
Members, there are two resolutions. The question is that the motion be approved for the zone operation. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it. The next question is that the motion be approved. Madam Clerk, please call the roll. And that is for the emergency power continuance.
Mr. R. Scott. Mr. Azan, Mr. Bartlett, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Campbell, Dr. Chang, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Clark, Dr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Ms. Grange, Ms. Grange, Mr. Green, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mr. Henry, Mr. Henry, Mr. Holness, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Main, Mr. Mackenzie, Dr. McNeil, Mr. Montague, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Terrelong, Reverend Thwaites, Dr. Tufton, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Daryl Vaz, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Dr. Wheatley, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Witter, Mr. Wright, Mr. Speaker,
Members, the vote in the affirmative, 47 and 16 absent. The vote approved, please.
Mr. Speaker, you have 40 members sitting on that side right now. You have 2 other members who voted before they went outside. Member Jackson voted and Member Fagan voted. So they make 16 over there. And on this side, you have 32, including yourself. So that is 48.
Mr. Warmington, I hear you. But what is documented to me, it's in the affirmative and it's recorded. I wish that it be 47 because the leader of the opposition business had walked out.
But I didn't count her. I said there's 14 members sitting there now. And there are 2 members who voted and went outside after they voted. I'm not going to talk about the acting leader opposition business. There are 40 members sitting across. 2 members voted before they left. That's what I'm saying.
Mr. Samuro.
You have 40 members sitting there.
Mr. Speaker.
You have 40 members sitting there.
Mr. Speaker, as we are now preparing to go forward, I would like to move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable private members' motion to be taken today. Because, as you know, it is taken on a Wednesday, but today is Tuesday, so we'd have to ask the House's permission so to do.
Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
All right, Mr. Speaker, there were a number of motions that we had lined up for today, but the extent to which we were involved in the measures taken by the Prime Minister has caused us at this stage at 5:15 to start private members' motion. I had given an undertaking to Mr. Speaker. I had given an Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
I had given an undertaking to take the motions standing, the reports standing in the name of the member from Westmoreland. Initially, we had thought we would be able to get through 4 motions, 4 reports. Today, we can only get through number 62 and 63. We will do the other 40, there were others next week, 49 and 53. All right. We will also be taking, Mr. Speaker, the motion number 28 today. And we will be taking the private member's motion number 15. No, sorry. Private member's motion 47, which deals with the support for Parliament for the establishment of the law school at the University of Technology. What I'm going to suggest, with the exception of the reports from the PAAC, is that the movers of the motions
the member from Trelawney South and Kingston Central open the debate, but suspend it in seeking to for the technology? Oh, okay. Well, then that's it. That one will be open for anyone wishing to contribute. So if there is no contributor, we just ask that the member closes the debate. But in the case of the PAAC reports, we will see the member the chairman take it through all its stages. And the member from Southern Trelawney will take the resolution standing in her name. Starting now with the chairman of the PAAC, the member from Western Westmoreland.
Dr. McNeil.
Thank you. Thank you. We're taking the PAAC reports. I'm going to take reports, Mr. Speaker, 62, 63, and 64. It's going to be very brief. Mr. Speaker, the reports were tabled some time ago. I'm just going to raise two issues with regards to the reports. One has to do with the three reports are the Ministry of Tourism, which is 62, 63 is the Ministry of Justice, and 64 is the Ministry of Health. Just briefly, I just want to make a comment on the number 64, which is the Ministry of Health. Just one point, there is in the report, something was brought to the attention of the committee that there was a long-standing shortage of dentists in the country, with only 250 registered dentists, which equates to a ratio of 1 dentist per 11,000 patients, which is well in excess of the 1 to 2,000 ratio regarded globally as the optimal ratio. This is something that has been there for a long time. Recently, both the University of the West Indies and UTech have opened up dental schools. So we should, over the next few years, see this ratio getting a proper balance. But it is an issue, and the committee had asked that the chief dentist prepare a plan, including the budget, for increasing the numbers of dentists and submit it to the PAC. It is a bit overdue, but we will table it in Parliament and let the Ministry of Health know. But it's just one of those things, because there were some issues with the dental schools and the rolling out, how it affects the budget. The second comment has to do with the Ministry of Justice. And one of the issues that arose at the committee meeting was that there was a lack of legal and technical support for members here in the House, especially on whoever forms the opposition at any point in time. So when members wanted to introduce private members' bills, there was great difficulty in getting the legal support for those private members' bills. And we are recommending that a process should be established to assist the members with obtaining the legal and technical assistance required to formulate the private members' motions. The Ministry of Justice, who were there with us at the committee meeting, accepted that such requests could be entertained, and that they suggested that where we did have this, that the request for the motion should be sent to the clerk, and that the clerk would send it, the House would send it, referred to the Ministry of Justice for the legal advice. But I think it's important for us to mention it here in the House. Mr. Speaker, those are the comments on the three reports that were tabled, and I enjoin any members that would have anything to say on the reports as tabled.
I can say that based on discussions that I have had in the shortages of facilities for members of parliament, there is a program in place that provides interns, what we call not interns, but, well, interns. I think we all know what interns are in the parliamentary context for Department of Government. And that's quite right. The member from Central Kingston has reminded me that they are here in place, but they're not being utilized. Their services are not being utilized. So I'm imploring members, ministers and former ministers and opposition spokesmen to utilize the services so that we can be more efficient in the preparation and timeliness of submissions and resolutions. Because having served on that side for a number of years, far too many
Not enough.
Not enough, eh? All right. I can tell you it is very frustrating, very challenging. And it impedes the progress of the parliament because things that ought properly to be brought on a timely basis, in a proper format and so on, is not being done because it simply is impossible to get type of things done under the circumstance. So among the other things that we intend to do to improve the operations of the parliament, that is one that I would put at the top of the list because it enables us to debate issues and to bring to the public's attention all the various challenges that we are confronted with. So you have my full support, and I will see to it that they be provided on a timely basis. Any help you need, just please don't hesitate. Minister of Health, you have anything to say? You would like to make a contribution to what he said about dentists?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just briefly to say that we will provide that information. You're correct that there are plans to increase the cadre of persons trained. There are also plans to improve the infrastructure in terms of the areas covered. Last week, for example, I was at one opening where a dental surgery was added to what was not there before, to our facility. So I'd prefer to hold until that report is prepared properly and the chief dental officer make the necessary appearance. But we are working on the expansion of that program.
With that, Mr. Speaker, if there's nothing else, I'd ask that the House accept and approve the reports.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. House Leader.
Yes. No, we do have more to do. The next item is the matter standing in the name of the member, but I see he has left, the opposition spokesman on education. I see he has, yes, he has left the chamber. So, okay, I will call now on, is there anyone here who is prepared to respond to the motion that was presented earlier a long time ago, but we're now seeking to take it off the order paper by having it debated fully. In which case, if there is no one who wishes to respond, the what? Norman Manley Law School. Oh. No, sorry, UTEC. The proposed UTEC Law School is addressing.
Yeah. Just briefly, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
The treaty that establishes the law schools, and I believe the Council of Legal Education, provides in it that graduates of the bachelor's degree program, LLB program from the University of the West Indies are ipso facto eligible for entry into either the Norman Manley Law School or the Hugh Wooding Law School in Trinidad. Since back then, a third law school was established in the Bahamas, which I believe the same rules apply to. Now, at the time when that treaty was created, it was really part and parcel of the thrust to develop a regional legal education system. And it was anticipated at the time that the University of the West Indies, as the main tertiary institution in existence then, and perhaps I think the only recognized university in the English-speaking Caribbean at the time, would be the source of degrees that would lead to LLBs and then law school matriculation. So this is decades ago. Subsequent to that, UTEC developed a faculty of law and started to offer degrees in law. And apart from UTEC, there are other tertiary institutions that provide or have provided for them through law degree programs, which are accessed by Jamaicans who wish to pursue a degree in law. The effect of this has been to create an imbalance, which I think is clearly an inequity, where graduates of the University of the West Indies who leave with a law degree, regardless of the quality of their particular degree, are treated as having a prior claim on any available places at the law schools relative to the other students, whether they be UTEC graduates or other Jamaicans who have obtained a law degree through some other institution around the world. And they have to battle it out, so to speak, for the what left of available places and do an entry exam, a competitive entry exam, to get into the law school. And I'm told that the number of available places is often not known at the time that they do the exam, at least known to them. And it can be a relatively small number, less than 10. It has been from time to time, sometimes significantly more. But in any event, suffice to say, many of them do not make it, at least on their first attempt, and maybe some don't make it ever at all. Some are persuaded to do another degree through UWI, another law, having already got a law degree, to do another bachelor's degree, so as to get the benefit of the eligibility provided under the treaty. So this, I think, is an anomalous situation that has arisen for historical reasons which are understood, but where legal education in the region has changed fundamentally away from what was, I think, foreshadowed or anticipated by the persons who developed the treaty regime, which is part of our law. I think it's scheduled to the Legal Education Act. And I think that this is something that needs to be taken up by the government at the level of, at the international level, among the other countries that are part of the University of the West Indies and the law school system that we have, to see whether we can fashion a response that would allow a level playing field to all degreed law students who want to go on to pursue the professional qualification, which is called the Certificate of Legal Education and is offered by the law school. Yeah, and I think that whether we go the route of expanding law school places by building an additional law school, or what the solution may be, I think that will depend on available resources, the level of demand, etc. But I think the system itself of how available places are allocated is flawed and is no longer tenable, and I think in fact could be challenged through the courts because of the fact that it does discriminate against Jamaicans who happen to get a degree in law from an institution other than the University of the West Indies. So I would support, I don't even remember what the particular prayer of your motion was, member from Central Kingston, but the concept of looking at this issue again and finding a way of making the system of legal education equitable and non-discriminatory and open to all on the basis of merit, I would support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to the motion resolving that the Jamaican Parliament support the establishment of a law school at the University of Technology, Jamaica, and encourage government to advance this position at the next CARICOM Heads of Government meeting, with a view to its acceptance in accordance with the relevant treaty before the start of the next academic year, and further resolving that after debate, this resolution be referred to the Human Resources and Social Development Committee of Parliament so that further consultations may be undertaken. Mr. Speaker, I begin by commending the member for bringing the issue to the floor of this Honourable House. There is a real problem in respect of graduates of the University of Technology who have obtained an LLB degree seeking to gain admission in one of the Council of Legal Education's law school. And the one that is located here in Jamaica is the Norman Manley Law School. I'm pleased to report to the Honourable House that when the Council of Legal Education last met in Guyana on September 7 and 8, just over a month ago, the issue took center stage on the agenda. And in fact, it became clear that there is some misconception as to the process by which the issue is to be addressed. The member from St. Andrews South referred to the agreement establishing the Council for Legal Education. That is separate from the Treaty of Chaguaramas. And I think for a long time, persons have been confusing the two, thinking that it is a matter that should go to the Conference of Heads of Government instead of to the Council of Legal Education. It's not a mistake that is unique to you, Honourable Member. Many persons have confused the issue. But I think, Mr. Speaker, at the heart of the problem is Article 3 of the treaty establishing the Council of Legal Education, which speaks to admission to the law school. So there is automatic qualification for entry to one of the Council's law school for graduates of the University of the West Indies. The article provides that every person who holds a University of the West Indies LLB degree shall be eligible for admission to the law schools, and every person who holds a degree of a university or institution which is recognized by the Council as being equivalent to the University of the West Indies LLB degree shall, subject to the availability of spaces, that's one, and to conditions, if any, as the Council may require, be eligible for admission to the law schools, provided that any national who prior to the 1st of October 1972 was a holder of a university degree or had commenced upon a degree program other than in law and completed that program before October 1, 1975, shall be eligible to be admitted. That's a grandfathering provision. Mr. Speaker, what is clear from the issues that were put before Council is that more data is required for a proper assessment of the issue. And the question of whether an additional law school is required cannot yet be answered because there has to be consideration as to whether the existing law schools have the capacity and who will deal with the funding, the curricula, and all of the equivalency issues. That the matter is actually being addressed by our Ministry of Education. The Honourable Minister of Education, Royal Reid, has established a committee as part of the work, comprising vast number of persons to collate the data and help with the analysis, and it will go back before the Council of Legal Education. A request was made of the Council of Legal Education for a member to sit on that working group, and the decision was taken that no member of the Council should sit by way of a vote because of the perceived conflicts of interest. But suffice it to say, Mr. Speaker, the issue has to be resolved of what will happen to those persons who have graduated with an LLB from the University of Technology, which has been determined to be equivalent to the UWI degree. Currently, because of the space issue and concerns about equivalency, notwithstanding the recent accreditation, you have an entrance examination, and it operates as a filter. I'm advised, and based on the data that I looked at, once persons pass the exam, it is highly likely that they will gain admission. But Mr. Speaker, I have had the record of all of the examination results as all member of council. And the truth is that, contrary to what is being said, there is a high failure rate of the exam. I mean, high failure rate of the entrance exam. It may raise the question as to whether that is designed deliberately to exclude persons, but I was shocked to see grades as low as 5%. And it begs the question, how can you graduate with an LLB degree and you're writing a contract or a rail prop exam and you're scoring as low as 5%? Yes. So there are, I don't think it's just the design, but I concede that there is a problem that has to be addressed. And the issue of space and allocation and standards, all of those have to be addressed. But, Mr. Speaker, sending the matter to the Human Resource and Social Development Committee of Parliament, I don't think is going to advance the cause based on what is currently happening with the establishment of the working group in the Ministry of Education and the fact that the issue is a live issue on the agenda of the Council of Legal Education. Also, it is not a matter that is to go to the Conference of Heads of Government because it is a different treaty arrangement. So while I see the value of the debate, I don't know that the motion as framed will advance the issue in any way. May it so please you.
Reverend Tweed.
Mr. Speaker, thanks to the Attorney General and to my colleague from South St. Andrew for their responses. It's taking too long, Mr. Speaker, and it's not fair. There are significant numbers of persons, 500 already and growing, who have graduated from the University of Technology and who are unable to continue their qualifications so they can be professionals, so that they can pay back their student loans and achieve their ambitions. Sure.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. Just to say that a solution is being looked at because the agreement has a protocol which allows for a jurisdiction to determine qualification for practice. The Bahamas has utilized it, and so a solution is being worked out because the problem is real. Just to add that for.
Mr. Speaker, that's very hopeful and helpful. I'm grateful for the correction that it's not the CARICOM heads of government, but rather the Council of Legal Education, that the first, second, third, fourth, fifth paragraph of the resolution would have to refer to. And I would ask for, in due course, for an amendment to reflect that. I'm going to encourage members to accept the reference, however, to the Human Resource and Social Development Committee. Why? Because we want the deliberations to be public. Yes, and the Parliament, I think, would want to keep an eye on it. Not that it isn't being dealt with, but that it ought to be done in a transparent way, and rather than just an expression of encouragement, which otherwise would be the case. Let's keep this under consideration by virtue of the reference to the committee. I am, as the Attorney General, troubled by her record of the results of the examination. The trouble is that if you looked at many of the other capacities of the graduates in some of our tertiary institutions, you might find a similar trend. That's the problem. And bear in mind that the law degree at UTEC is accredited by the University Council of Jamaica, and therefore one assumes a level of of quality there. But undoubtedly, by whatever means, we have to ensure that literate people and highly qualified people are the ones who are admitted to any profession, and certainly a learned profession such as law. Remember that what the University of Technology is now asking, even if we have to go through these processes and back to the Council of Legal Education, surely it lies within the power of the government of Jamaica either to extend the purview of the Norman Manley Law School by having it establish another campus on the UTech premises so that they can accommodate. The problem with the Norman Manley Law School now is space. There is no issue regarding the availability of suitable faculty. The president of the University of Technology is an eminent attorney of high international standards, and their faculty also are highly regarded at the Jamaican bar and elsewhere. So the intent of bringing it here and insisting on it at this stage is that we should assist in whatever way we can, and I believe there is a clear way, as the Attorney General has indicated, to ensure that this group and all subsequent groups, as well as the backlog, are provided an opportunity within their competence and subject to high standards to achieve their goal. I am happy to hear reinforced that the committee from the Ministry of Education is dealing with it. I had hoped that perhaps, if not at this stage, another stage, the Ministry could acquaint us as to the stage that they've reached, and I think the Committee on Human Resources perhaps would be a good locus for that to take place. Mr. Speaker, what we want to do is to give every opportunity for Jamaicans to achieve their personal goals and their national goals. There are wide areas of law that are begging for qualified persons to explore, to advance the jurisprudence, and to play their part. And we must use, Mr. Speaker, it's a broad point I want to make. We must use power and authority always to enable, never to disable. And in this case, we are disabling so many students who we have no reason to. It's not just the students from UTech. There are students who take, many students who take examinations from the University of London, yes, and other British universities equivalent to, and they have to line up for this examination. I think this year, at a pinch, there are 20 spaces beyond the UWI graduates, and probably 5 times that number of aspirants properly qualified. In the circumstances, I commend the effort by government to complete the process of enabling a law school to be set up, of the extension of the existing one so that those more spaces will be created, and urge that this House will accept the amendment which provides for the position to be advanced with the Council of Legal Education rather than the CARICOM heads of government, simple amendment, and also that we do place the matter before the appropriate committee of Parliament for follow-up. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, in an effort to assist, I'd just like to propose. Mr. Speaker, may I seek your permission to speak from a seat other than my own? Thank you. In an effort to bring the debate to a conclusion and to take it to a next stage, and bearing in mind the concession made by the Honourable member, I'm suggesting for consideration that the first paragraph of the prayer be it resolved. There's a.
I'm being advised that the debate was closed. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, it is true the debate is closed, but you would have to put the amendment, and surely the member could be helpful in assisting to frame the amendment in the best way possible. I would encourage you.
Speaker, it would require you suspend the standing order in respect of the procedure and that it be reopened to consider an amendment so that the motion can proceed and not be voted on, essentially. So first, for the standing orders to be suspended.
I don't need to put it. You may proceed.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. Be it resolved that the Jamaican Parliament support the establishment of a law school at the University of Technology, Jamaica, or support the expansion of the existing law school, the Norman Manley Law School, and encourage the government to advance this position at the next meeting of the Council of Legal Education. Yes. Because, Mr. Speaker, there is to be determined what is the best way forward. So you don't want to, it's a compromise to assist the cause in light of the work that is currently being done.
Mr. Speaker, if that pleases you and the Honourable House, the amendment is accepted.
I now put the amendment. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the resolution as amended. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, every day I get more and more encouraged by the strategy that has recently been employed in this House, because it is my intention as the leader of this House to encourage members not to look at the time, because we come here one day a week to do what the people elected us to do. They did not elect us to go in search of a ministry. That is the prerogative of the Prime Minister acting as the head of government. He puts a team together. We are all members of Parliament, and we must come here and be patient and be prepared to debate the issues that affect our constituents. That's what we're here for. So, that is why I've embarked on a program of ridding ourselves of this batch of outstanding resolutions and motions that have been languishing on our order paper, and I'm going to get them done. In keeping with that sentiment, I now call on the member from Southern Trelawney to speak on a matter that I know is near and dear to our heart and affects the judiciary of our country.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I rise to preface the resolution standing in my name in relation to our retired judges of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal by sharing with you a quote from a distinguished member of the Supreme Court of the United States, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who in March of 1931, when he was celebrating his 90th birthday and at that time retiring, he shared this on that occasion. He said, "The riders in a race do not stop short when they reach the goal. There's a little finishing canter before coming to a standstill. There is time to hear the kind voices of friends and to say to oneself, the work is done. But just as one says that, the answer comes. The race is over, but the work never is done while the power to work remains. The canter that brings you to a standstill need not be only coming to rest. It cannot be while you still live, for to live is to function. That is all there is to living." And this was said by a man, a jurist, at 90 when he was retired. I have shared this quote with you because I have found that this distinguished judge, at the age of 90, recognized that even after his retirement, in his finishing canter, he unapologetically articulated the fact that he still had so much more to offer. Retirement doesn't mean that you stand still and await your death. For in his own words, to live is to function. The resolution, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is, whereas former judges of the Supreme Court and Court of Appeal of Jamaica who have retired are prohibited from returning to the practice of law for which they have been trained, most of whom have no formal training in any other discipline, impacting their ability to earn at a time when intellectually they are still able to function well. And whereas the pension paid to retired judges is determined by what their salaries were at the date of their retirement and remains unchanged from the time of retirement until their death, some retired judges now live in difficult circumstances because pensions are not indexed to the salaries of the sitting judges now. And as in the case of some other organizations, such as the Bank of Jamaica. And whereas the value of pensions received continues to decline as the consumer price index advances, and the value of the Jamaican dollar, in real terms, continues to decrease. And whereas the principle of indexation of pensions to the salary of sitting judges has now been formally recognized in the present agreement, which has been struck with judges, who will henceforth have their pensions, sitting judges now will have their pensions linked to the salaries of sitting judges. And whereas the unfair disparity between judges previously retired and those who will retire in the future will be greatly increased as a consequence of the acceptance of this necessary principle of indexation. And whereas retired judges lose all their health insurance benefits which they had enjoyed as members of Her Majesty's judiciary, this happening at a time when, because of advancing years, it becomes more essential that such health insurance coverage be made available. And whereas it is believed that the husbands of retired judges would not receive the pension benefits accorded to wives of male judges in the event of the death of such retired judge while such a judge is in retirement. And whereas representations have been made on many occasions over several years by retired judges to have their issues addressed, no real attention has been paid to their plight. In fact, the scant regard with which such representations have been treated has left some of our retired judges feeling abandoned and disrespected at a time when they are most vulnerable. And whereas the remit of the Commission, which reviews and makes recommendations for judges' salaries, does not include making recommendations on behalf of retired judges, although it is well understood that the Commission is sympathetic to the retired judges' urgent needs. And whereas this very inequitable state of affairs is unfair and very prejudicial to persons who have served their country with distinction, giving their best and most productive years. Be it resolved by this Honourable House the following. 1. The pension paid and payable to retired judges aforesaid be indexed to the salary of judges of the courts at the level at which they served as sitting judges. 1. 2. For these purposes, the salary shall be such as is used to compute taxable income, thus incorporating emoluments and housing. 3. The health insurance benefits accorded to sitting judges be extended to all retired judges of the aforesaid courts. 4. It is appropriate, Mr. Speaker, and I think herein, that the changes proposed be implemented now, and in the same manner as the new salary structure for sitting judges has been implemented, and without undue delay, as such delay will only create greater hardships for our retired judges. 5. That instructions be given for the Honourable Financial Secretary to provide to the Honourable Minister of Finance and Planning a cabinet submission which incorporates both the new salary structure of present sitting judges as well as the new index pensions of retired judges. 6. That all the pension benefits which may be accorded to widows of deceased male retirees be similarly held to apply to widowers of deceased female retirees. 7. That such legislative and or constitutional changes that are necessary be made forthwith in order to allow retired judges to return as sitting judges on a contractual basis, this to facilitate the reduction of waiting time for trials to be heard. And this House knows that the Honourable Minister sitting in front of me has repeatedly spoken about this. And it is well known now that we are setting in criminal courts and in the civil courts, Mr. Speaker, matters to be listed in the year 2022. So if we have those judges that are intellectually capable and can help, this would also help us. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, and members of this House, because I feel very strongly about it, our judges retire at 70 years old, not at 90, 70 years old. They are alert, they have a deep sense of dedication, and they have amassed intellectual capabilities that are able to help to advance our justice system. I think that as a people in this country, we owe it to our retired judges to support this resolution. This will indeed help to bring real justice and real prosperity to our people by the reduction of waiting time for trials, because it is well known that justice delayed is justice denied. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that our people are our greatest asset. And my emphasis this evening is not, I want you to note, I'm saying our people are our greatest asset. Not just our young people. I mean all our people, whether we are young, middle-aged, or aging. It is therefore, Mr. Speaker, time for us as a people to capture the full value of all our people, which includes our retired judges. Mr. Speaker, sometimes in life, there is that moment when it is possible to make a change for the better. This, Mr. Speaker, is not politics. This, I think, is such a moment where we can all choose to advance justice for all our people by supporting this resolution. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
House Leader.
Now you see how government operate. You see how government side of this house operate. All right. Well, nothing is going to happen. The Minister of Finances is here and he's sitting patiently. Yes, he has observed all that was said. We just need action now. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I wish now to suspend the debate on the resolution brought by the member from Southern Trelawney. Well, you can ask for that suspension.
Those in favor for the suspension of the debate?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it. House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today. I look forward to next week when we will have as vibrant a session as we did today. We'll be dealing with those other motions that are on the order paper, and we are expecting to answer questions next week. And the Minister of Finance has one or two matters that will be brought to the House. So we'll have a nice mix, and hopefully, pardon? I can't hear. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask you to adjourn the House until tomorrow, next week, Tuesday, at 2 o'clock.
The motion is that the House be adjourned until next week, Tuesday, at 2 p.m. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to this another lesson in mathematics. Today, we'll be using base 10 blocks to solve subtraction problems. Let's take a look at our objectives. By the end of the lesson, pupils will be able to use base 10 blocks to solve subtraction problems. What are base 10 blocks? Base 10 blocks are mathematical manipulatives that we can use to do subtraction, addition, and even multiplication. Let's take a look at what is subtraction. Subtraction is the process or act of taking a quantity from another. Let's take a look at an illustration with some base 10 blocks. Here we have base 10 blocks showing thousands, hundreds, tens, and ones. In the thousand position, we have one solid block. In the hundreds position, we have 6 blocks. In the tens position, there are 7 blocks. And in the ones position, we have 2 blocks. Now let's move on and see how we can use these manipulatives to solve subtraction problems. Let's take a look at our first example. Here we have 62 minus 46. If you look closely, you will notice that we have 6 tens block, which give us 60, and 2 unit blocks, which give us 2 ones. Now we want to take away 46 from this number. Do you think we can do that, boys and girls? I think we can. Let's go ahead. First, let's pay a little attention here to the digit in the ones column for 62. We have 2 ones in that column, and we would like to give away 6 ones. Can we do that? No, we can't. What do you think we will have to do? If you said regroup, then you are correct. Let's see how we can regroup to give away 6 ones from 62. Here, we're taking one group of 10 from 62, and we're going to regroup that group of 10 and replace it as 10 units or 10 ones. Now we have 10 ones added to our 2 ones that we had there before will give us 12 ones. Now, do you think we can take away 6 ones from 12 ones? Let's see how we will do that. 6 ones take away from 12 ones will leave us with 6 ones for our ones column. Now let's go over to the tens column and see what will happen. We have 5 tens remaining over there. Now we're going to take away 4 tens. Here we go. Which leaves us with 1 10 and 6 ones. So 62 minus 46 will give us 16. There you have your one group of 10 and 6 ones. Let's look at another example. 445 minus 129. Now, we have 5 units in the ones position, but we want to give away 9. Can that happen, boys and girls? I don't think so. What do we have to do? Yes, we will have to regroup. So we're going to go over to our tens column, and we're going to take one group of 10 from there and replace it as 10 ones. Can we subtract 9 ones from our 15 ones now? I think we can. Let's do that. We are left with 6 ones in the ones position. Now we are going over to our tens position. We have 3 tens remaining. Now we want to subtract 2 tens. Let's see how we'll do that. Which leaves us with 1 10. Now let's move on. We're now going to work with our 100 blocks. There are 400 blocks there, but we are going to subtract 1 from it. Let's do that. Now we have 300 blocks remaining. Can you tell me now what number the remaining blocks represent? If you said 316, then you are correct. Let's look at another example. 368 minus 129. Here we have 8 units and we'd like to subtract 9 units. Now, in order for us to do that, we're going to regroup. So we go to the tens column and we're going to take one group of 10 from there and regroup them as 10 units. Now we have 18 units and we want to subtract 9 units. Let's do that. That leaves us with 9 units. Now we're going to our tens. There are 5 tens remaining and we want to subtract 2 tens. Let's try that. That leaves us with 3 tens. Let's move on to the hundreds. There are 3 hundreds and we'll subtract 100. What number does the remaining blocks represent? If you said 239, then you are correct. I hope you understood what we just did. Now, I'd love for you to work with a partner with your base 10 blocks and solve those that we have on screen. Let's now review our objective to see if we have achieved that for today. Did we use base 10 blocks to solve subtraction problems, renaming digits in the ones and tens position?